let me start by saying I was really happy that there was a talk like Andrew's before mine, because I was hoping exactly for that kind of introduction to context and what they are, so I can focus on practicality and assessments. So, so this first slide is essentially saying an equation has disappeared for some reason. Oh, okay. There was some equation here, however. So a language model is a function that takes a series of tokens, words, and predicts the next token. And the important thing is that after it deletes the first token, so it got a finite context, which is perhaps the biggest limit. So the reason GPT cannot write a novel right now is because novels are too big. And while it's writing chapter 3, it would have forgotten about chapter 1. So the vanilla implementation of large language models right now can't do that. Of course, you can equip them with external memory, and people are trying to do that with very good results. But more in general, right now, the GPT we see, GPT 3.5 is the green one and the free one, and then GPT-4 is available behind a paywall. I'm using GPT-4 right now, but there's an even bigger GPT-4 with 32 kilobytes, which is on a research preview, but still, it's 48 pages of content. So it's got this limitation, and to put that in context, that's almost exactly the capacity of Commodore 64. So that's where we're at in terms of evolution, that potentially bigger GPTs with all the technical issues that are inbuilt in them could have much bigger context. And there's honestly no reason to assume that would be a huge issue, because we can remember more than 48 pages as human brains. So what I want to tell you is that this talk is called ChatGPT, but first of all, there's not one ChatGPT. There are tons of different implementations you can do by prompting the model, by fine-tuning it to prefer certain tokens to others. For instance, ChatGPT is itself a version of GPT 3.3, really, with some additional training that sort of collapses it into helpful assistants. There are ways to break it out of that, but you have to give me very strange prompts in order to do it. You can have it reflect on its outputs, critique it, and produce a better one. Again, this is something that the model is able to do. You can implement reward models where you tell it to prefer certain things to others, and it does. Filters, why doesn't ChatGPT swear at you? Because it's forbidden to do it. There are totally filters in the corpus on which it has been trained to. Access to tools, we've seen that there are, for example, it can talk to Wolfram Alpha now. So now it can do integrals, for instance, because it just recognizes an integral, tells Wolfram to do it, gets back the result, and reads it. And then, of course, user interfaces or prompt generation. You don't need to be great at prompts to do this. Someone else is great at prompts and takes your input, tells it to GPT, and GPT answers. So this can be automated. There are a few examples I'll tell you in a bit, but the point is, one large language model can have thousands of different incarnations. And on top of that, yes, I know this is called ChatGPT but there are there's more than one language model out there. We've got Meta AI's one, which is called Llama for some reason. Bard from Google, which is out for preview if you want to sign up, it's free. Claude from Tropic.ai. Midjourney and DALL-E are image generation, but this sort of feeds in back into GPT-4 because GPT-4 is multimodal. It can take images as input, and I don't mean images of text. I mean, you can look at this thing. I ask it, what happens if I push this up? And it's like it falls on the floor and can't spill out. So I can understand pictures. So on top of that, GPT-4 has an API, so you can again prompt it with separate tools. It has now plugins, and the way a plugin is written is by telling GPT to think about something in a certain matter. So there's sort of self-reflection. There was a tweet that I saw yesterday. I couldn't manage to put it in, but they look at how Bing works when they think about something, and there's sort of an inner monologue of Bing, where you prompt it and it says, oh, I recognize this is that, so I should search the web for this. It does it. The results are that, so I should tell the user this. So there's sort of an inner monologue, and that's sort of not code in some sense. So bottom line, right now, there are tens of thousands of things out there with different abilities, and each one of them can be better or worse at a precise task. So bottom line is, if you put your assessments on ChatGPT and it writes nonsense, doesn't mean that there isn't another better prompt, incarnation, plugin, reward model trained and whatnot that can do it well instead. So again, this is the self-reflecting thing that I saw recently. For some reason, Twitter is where it's happening. So if you want to stay up to date to what's happening here, Twitter is where it's at. I don't know why. If you equip LLM, so large language model, with self-reflection, then it gets better at a few tasks. And also, again, with Wolfram superpowers, now it can do this integral, probably couldn't do it before, but with Wolfram, it just does it. And it's able to tell you stuff about this function. So if you ask it things about this, it understands what it is, and it can keep the exercise going. So it's not just a user interface for Wolfram. It actually has all the abilities of Wolfram, because it can prompt it as soon as necessary. And also, even if you decide, oh, let's stick to the current status of GPT, well, it comes out all the time. I gave a talk on the 30th of January, sorry, on the 29th of January, where I looked at mathematical abilities of GPT. I'm a mathematician. And then on the day after this, I opened GPT to see this window. I redid the prompts, and it had gotten much better. So even change logs of the same model can give better abilities to it. And also GPT-4 is a huge leap forward. And again, ChatGPT came out for the public in November 22, and we're now in April 23. So this is fast. So the question, given a task as can a large language model do it? Can be writing these assessments and critical work, write a poem, whatever you think. So for reasonable X, so unless you ask it to, do stuff like jump, which it cannot do because it's in a computer, if the answer is no, yes, then it's maybe. You can't be certain it can't do it, because we're just exploring now what the emergent abilities these are. So it might just be that the right prompt has not been unlocked, or the right fine-tuning has not been done. So from our point of view, the answer should be maybe, and a variation able to perform X could be discovered tomorrow and implemented faster than we can possibly react. And the issue is that this is very fast. Again, this has been flying around a lot, but it tells you how fast any improvement in GPT can reach people. 1 million users in 5 days, which is unprecedented. And the pace of progress is such that even experts in the field struggle to keep up. So there is an argument that there's no higher authority that you can ask, can GPT do this, and get a definitive answer unless the answer is yes. Further, we cannot reliably detect outputs. Now, there have been detectors that have been put out. So first of all, the first theoretical work that tells you that detectors are not reliable is out. If you try to use current detectors that can basically only get low-hanging fruit, which means very short prompts that generate very standard stuff, as soon as you rephrase it, even tell GPT, use unlikely words, or you change a few things, the detector fails. I know it because I use it daily for most things. So I just put in the detector and it fails every time. There's a theoretical foundation here, but also assume that a working detector exists today, I think it can actually tell you whether something is GPT written or not. Well, what if tomorrow a new slight variation of a large language model comes out and now it bypasses the detector? What are you going to do if your policy is based on the existence of a detector? And again, this is fast. There are 2 examples here. There are an Instagram account which is focused on, oh, sorry if they're watching this and I'm misinterpreting now, but it's just a random example I found. It's focused on, prompting, giving the right prompts to GPT, developing something that can help students generate essays or critique essays or do many of the things that we might or might not want to allow. And here's another example where a TikTok influencer with 7.2 million followers shared a post and recommended a certain AI tool which promoted itself to it. So overnight, a prompt could be discovered that bypasses the detector, and all your students could be using it to generate their essays, and your detector-reliant policy is now worthless. So this can happen. There's nobody else that can do it what GPT can and cannot do, definitely. And current detectors are also bad. That's another point. So there's an argument in plagiarism where most plagiarisms are lazy. So current Turnitin detects plagiarism, but if you rephrase everything really cleverly, it doesn't. but then you're actually done the work. We cannot rely on this because again, everything can be automated. So every fancy super complex prompt can just be put in an interface, then a student pays $5 a month and can use it. So lazy plagiarists can still produce excellent work because they can just copy someone else's rephrasing. And also currently, there's something with this game, but whatever. False positive rates are high and accusing someone of plagiarism is serious. That's what the last line says. If we now start a plagiarism procedure in our university, it's pretty serious. It takes a few weeks, the student is really anxious. So we really shouldn't, because the random detectors are that this is AI generated, we really shouldn't accuse a student for that. So it's a serious matter. We don't have a reliable tool that can do it, so we should not use it at all. At least that's my take. So my proposal on how to think about this and then start working to live this new world is that with minimal input and effort, the large language model can perfectly, instantly, and freely simulate a good student's output. Is this true? No, not yet. But it's easier to work on this stuff because whatever we think that LLMs can do, maybe they can do it tomorrow. And maybe everyone will know by then. And if we base our policy on that, a classical example is right now, large language models are really bad at sources. If you ask them to generate a bibliography, they make up papers that don't exist. But this is today, in 4 months. For all I know, someone might be working on this, and tomorrow a good bibliography AI tool could be out. So if I based my anti-cheating policy on bibliographies, that might be a bad idea. And so my argument is that a successful teaching assessment policy will be one that would work where this assumption is true. And it takes time, research, and effort to develop a good policy. We can't just go with what we think is right and implement it on students because assessments is a serious thing. It needs to be fair, it needs to be accessible, it needs to be authentic. So if we choose to work on a radical big change instead of hundreds of small ones, as soon as the LLMs get slightly better, we have a better chance of success. And again, what's the alternative? The alternative is that you continually redesign policy, readapting everything to the ever-changing frontier as new things come out every day. And you cannot even really outsource this because external companies that do the textures and stuff are just like any other of us. This is moving too fast and it's too big to just pretend that we can control it. So that's basically my high-level argument. So just to mention, what are a few possible things that people have suggested that could work? Well, first of all, educate students on plagiarism. If it knows to work. Tell them if you're plagiarizing, you're really learning nothing. And when you need these skills, you won't have them. So students are receptive to that. Not 100% of students, but talking to students about plagiarism becomes even more important. Many of us already do, many of us maybe don't, but it would be important to do this. There's this argument of tracking drafts, where if you copy and paste an essay from a large language model, you can't really, well, it instantly appears as a done work. But if we would be able to track drafts, for instance, my project students normally send me a draft every 2 weeks, and I can see how it changed, and I can see how they've implemented my feedback. And this could be automated. Imagine a student working on Google Docs or online Office 365. Well, it saves a version of what they're writing every 5 minutes. So those are sort of saved, and you can sort of be sure a human is writing that. Of course, it is conceivable that you could get an LLM to produce drafts and whatnot, but that becomes the argument of lazy plagiarism. That would be a lot of effort. So might as well write it. Do not ban LLMs because you can't detect them. So it's a law that cannot be enforced a real law. Philosophical question. But set clear guidelines. For instance, it's probably okay to ask the model to, are there any grammar mistakes in my essay? Because Grammarly is fine and we use it. Probably not okay to ask it, oh, this is the essay, just write it. There is a middle ground there. Where's the line? I think it would be an individual decision overall, because different courses are different and different lecturing styles are different. But do set some guidelines. You can do this, you cannot do this. In some cases, vague words have been used. I've seen one policy which has substantial use of LLMs is not allowed. That to me means nothing. What is substantial? That's kind of the question. But you can hide behind those words. But as long as there are guidelines, students are aware that you're watching them. And you are aware that these things exist, which they might think some lecturers are not. Of course, safe, haven't maximized the human-to-human interaction components. So I'm not saying everything needs to be in-person exams from now on, because that's bad for other reasons. But if your course is entirely based on asynchronous remote assessments, then maybe we have a problem here. So if there is at least one task, for instance, an in-person written task, a presentation, an actual experiment in some courses, then you can evaluate their performance in one with the performance on the other. And if they're really too different, then maybe you have something to look at. And finally, universities have contract cheating policies. Manchester has one, other universities have others. Essay mills have been a thing for lots of time. So if you've never read it, apply it and use it with caution, because these are serious things. But when malpractice is suspected, do not improvise, follow that procedure, which is research-backed and has been developed very carefully by the university. So final thoughts, take away the slides you screenshot from the talk. My inbox is being assaulted by several AI detectors companies, some new, some old, which will claim that they can detect AI-generated outputs. Research says they can't, so just don't fall for it. Hold the line. It's normal that companies will do it. It's their entire business model being threatened. So just be aware that they have an interest in line for you. Engage with LLMs. If you've never used ChatGPT, I don't think that's a good idea. So use it, learn to prompt it, run your assessments in it, follow people that do complex stuff that you don't have the time to do, stay up to date. Nobody can pretend that you are 100% up to speed with this, but I don't think it's a good idea to perceive it as this exotic thing that you've never tried. It's free. Well, the 3.5 version is free, which is good enough to get a feeling. And so my suggestion is spend a few hours with it. Ask it stuff, ask it to do things. It's also very good for your workflow in some cases. Classic example, summarize this very long thing in 5 bullet points. Excellent work. There's a high-level argument that it would be extremely important for sort of human critical thinking. If AI becomes very, very good, we need to be able to evaluate whether it's actually giving us the right conclusion if we ever have it do original work. So we're going to need students that have actually learned the topic. So the arguments that I've seen that, oh, do we really need them to write essays because the AI can do it for them? It's a fair argument for calculators, but when AIs can actually be robot humans, then maybe we want to preserve the human skills that we've had so far. So yes, it is important that higher education can still teach students to learn concepts, material, engage, critical thinking, and then sector-specific skills. In-person assessments are, of course, excellent, because if a student is in a room, they can't ask GPT, but not the only option. And of course, as we know, they don't work very well for certain sets of students. They're not very fair, stress-related problems, and whatnot. And then finally, hybrid assessment that include in their design that LLMs could be used could help prepare students for the new work they will face. They're going to use GPT. So again, having guidelines or telling them what an acceptable use of it consists of. The classic example might be they write a project or they solve an exercise and then they have to present it to the class, or anything really that becomes sector specific. So it's hard to give general examples, but it is possible to include it in workflow as long as this is done with a clear goal in mind. So yeah, having said that, thank you for your attention. These are a few sources, hybrid sources. Bill Gates says this, like word of God. Yeah, thanks for your attention.